Prologue. She was no longer falling, no longer spinning uncontrollably. There was no pain either. Rainbow Dash suddenly realized her eyes were closed and opened them eagerly to see what sort of miracle had occurred to keep her alive. But what she saw wasn't comforting. Everything was a light blue with white mist pillowing around, making it difficult to see far away. Rainbow Dash stood up and looked down at her hooves. She felt like she was standing on something, and it looked like she was standing on something, but there wasn't anything there. She was floating on nothingness. Of course, Rainbow Dash thought to herself. She hadn't survived by some miracle. She was dead. And this must be some place ponies go to when they die. She tried not to feel sad about it. After all, it hadn't been a long, painful death. More importantly, she never got to live, and do things like make more friends, or go on dates, or get married, or have foals who would grow up and get on her nerves and bug her every day for stupid things. She sighed. No use worrying about that now. Taking a few tentative steps forward, she called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. A few more calls as she continued to move forward. Again, no responses. Well, this is pretty lame. She started to tap her hoof on the ground impatiently. "Hey!" came another voice. Rainbow Dash leapt up in surprise as she turned in the direction of the voice. What came forward was another shock, but here in this boring land of mist, what wasn't? "Sorry to keep you waiting. I wanted to see how you'd react." She looked exactly like Rainbow Dash herself, and nothing like her at all. A perceptible feeling of offness prevented Rainbow Dash from thinking she was looking into a mirror. You know, do everything. Whatever it was looked like she grinned. Rainbow Dash felt offended that some pony had the audacity to look like her. She ran up to the imposter and tried to look threatening. The whatever it was didn't fall for it, though. "Hey now, don't get your feathers in a ruffle. Everything's fine." Sort of. Rainbow Dash wasn't about to let this imposter take control of the conversation. "No, you tell me who or what you are, and you tell me right now." She stamped her front hoof for emphasis. "Oh yeah, sure. I'm Loyalty," she said, standing straighter and opening her wings. Rainbow Dash had to admit the imposter looked pretty cool, but that was only because she looked a lot like Rainbow Dash herself. "You know, the element of harmony, and you're the one who currently embodies me, and that's why I look like you." "Well, okay, whatever. I'm dead, right? What now? Are you going to take me to some amazing place of eternal happiness, or what?" Loyalty chuckled nervously. No. There's not much more I can say, really, because I mostly only know what you do. The one thing I'm supposed to be explaining now is something really important, and I hope I have enough time. I probably shouldn't have waited around for so... Well, then get on with it. I don't want to stand here forever. Oh, yeah, sorry. Well, this wouldn't be happening if you weren't murdered. So first thing I gotta tell you is that you didn't die from an accident, despite what you may feel. What? That's ridiculous. Hey now, that's just the way it is. I don't have a lot of time to explain it, and I don't think you'd understand anyway. Just trust me, you were murdered. Rainbow Dash suppressed the urge to feel insulted. Okay, what else then? Well, due to complicated reasons I don't have time to explain to you, you'll be going back to life, and you can pick the time from when you and I first joined to your death. I don't think going back too close to your death is a good idea, though, so... I'm not stupid, sheesh. I know you're not, I'm sorry. I was just saying. Anyway, time's getting really short. Hurry and pick a time to go back to. Rainbow Dash tried to ignore the confusion and frustration that she felt as she thought about it. If she really was murdered, she couldn't just go back a bit before the storm and let some pony else try to save Ponyville. For one, she wouldn't feel right doing that, and for two, she'd die some other way. She'd need as much time as possible to find the killer. Okay, put me back to the day after the whole Nightmare Moon thing. That'll give me a bit of time to figure out who would want to kill me. If you say so. One last thing, you won't remember this conversation. Wait, what? Apple Rush's head suddenly cleared. She blinked. She was no longer looking up at Twilight Sparkle. She was no longer lying down. Confused and disoriented, Apple Rush took a glance around her. It was nothing like anything she had ever seen before. Everywhere was all a light, soft orange color with bits of white swirls everywhere, almost like a fog. Suddenly it hit her. Her foal. Where was her child? She looked at herself, and after confirming that she was not carrying, began to look around in a panic. Help! She took off running. Any pony out there? I need help! Hello, came a voice from somewhere in front of her. Applerush gasped in shock as some of the white mist started to move together, until it took a form unnervingly similar to how Applerush looked several years ago. Despite the resemblance, Applerush had no doubt that this thing wasn't a pony. Applerush felt her ears flatten. Who are you? I'm Honesty, and you're the pony who currently embodies me. What's your name? Applerush paused for a moment to let this sink in. Well, I'm Applerush. Well, Applerush, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just gonna have to come out and say it. You're dead. Oh. She thought about it. Of course, that was it. Twilight hadn't been able to help her after all. But what about her foal? Applerush felt herself tense up. If I'm dead and I'm here, but my foal isn't here, does that mean he or she survived? Honesty suddenly looked sad. I'm sorry, I don't know if your foal is alive or not. You're here because someone tried to take me from you, and killed you in the process. Applerush couldn't believe her ears. Say that again? This is what happens when ponies who are bonded to an element of harmony are killed for their element. I'm afraid you're here because a very specific event has happened to you, an event your foal didn't share. But... Applerush could feel tears forming in her eyes. Who would do such a thing? I don't know, Applerush. I'm sorry. I don't know very much about what happens in the world. I just sit inside the pony who holds me, and I feel what they feel, and I influence them, and they influence me. I don't experience their life, though, so I couldn't give you any ideas as to who did this. Applerush thought back, trying to remember. Twilight was helping her stay alive. Whoever killed her would have had to have been more powerful than Twilight. She shook her head. It didn't really matter now. There's something else, Applerush. Applerush lifted her head, slowly, uninterested in what Honesty had to say. Simply put, we elements can't be properly taken. Because some pony tried, my magic is going to do whatever it can to keep us together. In this case, you're going to be able to go back to life. Any time between when you became my holder and your death, you can go back and relive your life. Applerush's eyes widened. After all this bad news, she hadn't expected anything remotely hopeful to be said. Any time at all, between those two times. Any time at all, darling. Applerush was about to shout out a time, when she remembered she had been murdered. She couldn't just go back to whenever made her happiest. She had to make sure she wouldn't fall into the same situation again. And that meant she needed enough time to find out who killed her. Suddenly, a new thought erupted in the forefront of her mind. If I go back to before I became pregnant, will I get pregnant again at the right time? If I make sure to marry the same colt and, everything, what will happen to my child? Honesty shook her head. Again, I don't know. It could be that you won't be killed again and everything will work out and you'll get pregnant and have your child and everything will be fine. But maybe not. I don't know. Honesty looked down sadly. I hate to say this, but you don't have an unlimited time to think this over. If you don't choose soon, you'll be put back to the exact moment when you first got me. What? I don't have time? What's the rush? It takes a lot of magic to keep you here. I said you're dead, but you're not. Not really. I'm just keeping you here with my magic, but I can't do it forever. Time is very short. There's one last thing I need to tell you before you decide. You will not remember being here or having this conversation with me, but it'll influence your decision-making, and I'll remember it. And remember, I influence you too. Keep that in mind. Applerush was about to yell out in anger, but clamped up when she remembered the time limit. Think, Applerush. Did she want to risk not having a child at all, if it meant surviving? No, her foal was the most important thing to her. Applerush tried to open her mouth to speak, but before she could, Honesty said, I'm very sorry, Sugar Cube, but time's up. Pinkie Pie screamed, a loud, terrible scream. Pinkie Pie stopped. Her eyes were open, and the scenery had changed. She was no longer staring at Sugar Cube Corner. Instead, she was looking at a light pink emptiness. Swirls of white mist pillowed like loose cotton candy around her, making it hard to see. Pinkie looked around, feeling herself calm down as she did so. She turned around to look the other way, and as she did, found herself face to face with what looked like another pony, who looked a lot like her as a young mare. Except it wasn't a little pony. Not a pony at all.
"Hi there! I'm Laughter, your element of harmony. And what's your name?"
Pinkie Pie would have given an equally happy greeting if not for the situation. She didn't feel like being happy.
"I'm Pinkie Pie."
The thing that claimed to be her element smiled.
"Well, Pinkie Pie, now that we've got those introductions out of the way, I've got something super important to tell you."
Pinkie Pie felt herself smile involuntarily.
"What's that?"
Pinkie's smile fell as Laughter explained the situation to her, being killed for her element, her ability to go back and live her life again so they wouldn't get separated, everything.
"But what about my children? Will they still be born if I go back too far?" "I don't know, Pinkie. Maybe? If you're worried, you can just make sure to go back after their birth so you can love them lots, all over again."
Pinkie wasn't amused, not at all.
"I can't do that. I know who killed me. I know she killed the others for their elements. I have to save them. I can't just let them die for me."
Pinkie Pie couldn't help it. She was tearing up now. She loved her little fillies, but it just wouldn't be fair for her to have her children, but Applejack to die and lose hers, and Rainbow Dash to never even get the chance to have any.
"Wait, did you say you know who did this? Well then, this should be easy peasy for you. And them, you know. You could help them."
Pinkie Pie sniffled as she looked up, thinking hard.
"You mean because the same thing happened to them? You mean they'll be back too?" "Yep, you'll be all together. You'll just have to hope you all picked around the same time to go back to. If not, some of you will be waiting for each other."
That was okay, Pinkie thought to herself. If she went back too early, she could wait. It was way, way better than going back too late, before she could help her friends.
"All right."
Pinkie wiped away her tears.
"Can I go back to— Wait! I almost forgot to tell you. It's super duper important, and I almost forgot. How bad of me."
Pinkie tilted her head in confusion.
"You won't remember any of this happening. When you go back, it'll be like you died and just showed up back in your body in the past. Okay, now you can pick."
She looked really eager to hear Pinkie's answer, but once again Pinkie Pie felt less than amused. Thinking on it, Pinkie had never had such a long stretch of unhappiness.
"Then what's the point of this? There are lots of important things that I just learned." "Don't worry, Pinkie," said Laughter, looking as if nothing was wrong. "You won't remember this like a happy memory, but you'll remember it like a half-forgotten dream. It'll be okay. I'll remember it too, and I'll do my best to help out. So, when do you want to go? You still got some time to decide."
She was practically jumping in anticipation. Pinkie didn't need any more time. Her decision was the same.
"Put me in my bed the night after we threw that party for Luna. I'll be alone then, and it'll be early in my life. I'll be able to help every pony." "Sure thing, Pinkie Pie."
Rarity felt herself standing. She wasn't in that position before, and felt herself buckle as she balanced herself. The first thing she noticed, even before her surroundings, was the lack of pain. Her last moments were racked with such unimaginable pain, Rarity had forgotten what it was like to not hurt. She looked herself over. She looked fine, positively youthful, in fact, as if she were decades younger. Looking around, it didn't take long for her to understand. White everywhere? Mist. She was dead. Twilight had been right. She died without a chance to warn any pony. She felt herself seethe in anger. She hoped so much that Fluttershy wouldn't come to the same fate as the rest of them had. Now, anger is so unbecoming of you. Straight ahead, what looked like a younger mare came walking through the mists, toward her. As she got closer, Rarity noticed that this mare looked a lot like Rarity herself. A very young Rarity, back when things had been okay and Twilight hadn't started murdering her friends. And yet, it didn't look anything like her at all, not even like a pony. It was all very strange. "My name is Generosity. I'm your element of harmony." She nodded her head politely in introduction. "And what might your name be?" "Rarity." She heard herself say it, but she didn't feel herself say it. She was too stunned. "What a beautiful name. But down to business. I suppose you'd like to know what this place is and why you're here?" Rarity shook her head slowly. "I'm dead. Twilight Sparkle killed me for for you." "Oh, you know the name of the pony who did this. That is wonderful news. And of course, you are correct. You were killed by this Twilight Sparkle because she wanted to take me." Generosity gave a short, high-pitched laugh. "Joke's on her, though. We cannot be taken like that." "What do you mean? I'm dead, aren't I?" Generosity's smile fell. She looked like she was searching for the proper words, like a mother might talk to an ignorant child. "Well, yes and no. You died, but you're not entirely dead yet. I'm keeping you alive, you see, here, in this place. And I'm going to put you in your body back when you were alive." Her smile returned. "Any time you wish, darling, you can go back and live from that moment on and try to prevent this from happening again." Rarity felt herself grin. "Then I wish to go back to the day Twilight Sparkle showed up at my boutique. I'll just kill her right then and there, before she has a chance to do us any harm." Generosity looked shocked. "Now, that's not very ladylike." Rarity didn't care. She felt herself fill with anger at what Twilight Sparkle had done to her, and had done to them all. "You don't know what she did. If you're my element, and you were in me, didn't you suffer through it too? She deserves to die. She deserves more than just death. A quick stab in the back as soon as we meet is more merciful than any of the things she did to us." Generosity looked down and huffed at the ground nervously. "I'm sorry, darling. I didn't experience those things. I just know what emotions you were going through during your life, not the causes of them. I also can't take you back to then." Rarity was about to yell some more, but Generosity held up her hoof so she could continue. "I apologize, I wasn't quite clear. I can take you back to any time between when you got me and when you died. And I also must mention that you won't quite remember being here. You'll have to take that into account when you decide a good time to go back to." She sighed. "I also can't keep you here forever. You have to choose quickly. You may resume yelling if you wish." But Rarity felt all yelled out. Even if she got another chance, it seemed like there were too many obstacles in her path. She couldn't use this time to devise a plan and carry it out later, and she had to make sure to go back to a time when she could gather herself, alone, so she wouldn't suddenly seem strange or out of character. A realization dawned on her. "The others. Twilight tried to take their elements too. Did this happen to them? Will I meet them back there, or do we all have to struggle separately?" Generosity put her hoof to her chin in thought. "I'm pretty sure you will all be together, just not at the same times. Unless, of course, you all choose to go to the same time." Rarity thought as quickly as she could. She felt herself pacing back and forth as she did so, but didn't give it more than a moment's notice. She stopped. "The night after the Grand Galloping Gala, the year Twilight Sparkle came to Ponyville. We all went to our own houses, and I didn't see Twilight for a while after that. I remember it very clearly. I even remember what I was wearing. I never wore that outfit again. I would recognize it and know when and where I was." "Sounds marvelous. You ready to go now? No more questions?" "No more questions. I'm ready." She hoped she didn't choose to go too early. Twilight Sparkle was crying. All those years of work and preparation were gone. She had failed. Her eyes were closed in fear as she waited for the fatal buck that would end her life. Moments passed. It didn't come. She opened her eyes. Light purple and white mist everywhere. She looked down, astonished to find herself standing. She almost fell over in shock. What was going on? "Hello," came a voice. Twilight Sparkle watched in confusion as some of the white mist pillowed into a more pony-like form. It looked like her, like she did many decades ago when she was a young mare, but it didn't look anything like her. Twilight felt very uncomfortable. For the first time in a very long time, she had absolutely no idea what was happening. My name is Magic. I am your element of harmony, and you are dead. Twilight looked down at her hooves. Yes, of course, that was it. Fluttershy had killed her, and she hadn't felt a thing. But wait. Twilight looked back up at the thing that said it was her element. Wait a minute! I started with magic, but I should have all of them. All of them except for kindness, anyway. Oh dear. You can't take other ponies' elements. Well, not that easily, anyway. Twilight felt herself sting with intense frustration and confusion. If that was true, what had she been doing for all her life? All that planning, all that work, all those ponies' deaths? For nothing? Tell me, what is your name? Twilight Sparkle. Well, Twilight, am I correct in my assumption that you have been trying to take other ponies' elements your whole life? Twilight nodded. And you've been doing it by using the element's antithesis and then killing them? Another nod. Magic sighed. That's a very terrible thing, Twilight. It'll certainly make you more powerful, but that's not how you get more elements. Elements cannot be actively taken. They must be led. Twilight's ears perked up, despite her continued confusion. But all the books said, I don't know what any books said, but I do know how we work. I know best of all the elements. You cannot take another's element, especially while using the element's antithesis. Doing so instead triggers the event you find yourself in now. Twilight's head was roiling from the information. An entire lifetime of gathered knowledge was apparently so monumentally flawed as to have been useless. However, in death, she was getting some truth, it seemed. Explain what you mean. You're here now because some pony tried to take your element the same way you tried to take others. I don't know the details, so I can't explain further than this. You and I are connected, and I cannot be taken from you because I will prevent it. The only way for you to lose me, for any holder of an element to lose their element, is for them to stop embodying it. For example, if you stopped being a paragon of magic, I would leave you and find someone else more suited to hold me. So I could have taken their elements, if only I had been more like what those elements wanted in a holder? Magic nodded. And so long as their holders somehow changed personalities and values so drastically as to make their elements want to leave them, it's not easy. In fact, I'd call it impossible. Suddenly, Magic sneered at Twilight. But this is all unimportant. You of all ponies don't need to know any of this. What is important for right now is that, as a consequence of somebody attempting to sever us, we will be kept together through time travel. I don't understand. You will pick a time between when you became my holder and your death, and I'll put you back there. You and the memories you had at your death will be flung back to any time you think best in order to prevent our separation. Okay. And what if I want to go back to try to take the elements again? Another sigh. Twilight was reminded of those times when Celestia was especially annoyed at her. You will not quite remember this event happening. It'll be like a dream, one that will influence your actions. If you tried to take them again, you'd find yourself compelled to take a different approach than what you did before. Which is good, because that approach was wrong. I, however, think it'd be best for you to give up the idea. There are other ways to gain power. But that's not up to me. Now quickly, when do you want to go back to? Twilight thought about it. The night Celestia assigned me the task of collecting the elements. Very well, then. Chapter 1. She was floating. She was panicked. It was loud and bright. Her eyes were open, but they couldn't see a thing but light. And then a loud, drawn-out shout of no filled her ears. Her eyes closed involuntarily, and she felt herself move gently by an unseen force. She tried to fight it, but it wouldn't stop. She could see the light get brighter even through her closed eyes. Her pulse quickened. Her head hurt, a loud rumbling, and suddenly Applerush felt herself lying on a hard, cold stone floor. She heard other voices grumbling around her. She opened her eyes, and was shocked by what she saw. My head, said the very much alive Rainbow Dash. Alive? Rainbow Dash was alive, lying right there in front of her. Applerush looked around slowly, confused and more than a little afraid. Her friends were all around her. Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy, Twilight Sparkle, and— "Oh, thank goodness," said Rarity. She was standing next to Fluttershy, looking at her own tail. Applerush watched numbly as Fluttershy said the same thing she said all those years ago, when together they defeated Nightmare Moon. Applerush was too dazed and confused to stand up, let alone look down at her necklace, which she knew looked just like her cutie mark. When Pinkie Pie bounced over to her squealing, "Look at mine! Look at mine!" Applerush could only mumble as she tried to ask what was going on. "Applejack, what's wrong?" said Pinkie Pie when she noticed Applerush not looking at her. Again, Applerush failed to speak. "What's wrong? Did she hurt herself?" "Applejack, did you hit your head?" said Twilight Sparkle as she walked toward her. Applerush swallowed hard. "No, everything's fine." "Indeed it is," came the familiar voice of Princess Celestia. She was still on the floor, and she couldn't bow any lower when Twilight ran in for a hug. Slowly picking herself up, she watched in silence as the well-remembered scene unfolded. She had had enough. Quickly, and without a word, Applerush bolted for the exit. Ignoring the calls of her old name, she continued to run, all the way back to Sweet Apple Acres, never stopping, no matter how winded she was. Only one thought was going through her mind as she ran. Where was her foal? When she arrived, she ignored her family's confused looks as she ran straight back to where things last made sense, the place she was foaling, where Twilight was helping her have her child. In the back of her mind, she knew what was to greet her, but she still wasn't ready for it. The area was empty. No pony was there. Somehow, despite the impossibility, the disbelief, Applerush was just Applejack again. No Peanut, no foal. Half of her life had disappeared completely. It was like it had never happened. Applerush, no, Applejack, began to cry. It was a while before any pony found her. Her brother walked up next to her, all young like he was before.
AJ? What's the matter?"
She couldn't say. How could she? Who would believe someone who said that they lived all this already? It didn't make sense. What could possibly make such an impossible thing happen? A horrible thought forced itself into Applejack's mind, so fast Applejack almost felt somebody else had put it there. She had died. She let her big brother lead her back to her room as she cried silently. No pony spoke to her as she walked. They probably didn't know what to say. She gave a small thanks to her brother as she entered her room, but then quickly closed the door so he couldn't follow. She wanted to be alone. Her family didn't bother her much. Every hour or so, some pony would knock and she'd make a noise to assure them that she was still there, alive and everything. Later, her brother opened the door carrying a cup of warm milk with cinnamon and a baked apple slice floating in it. He set it down next to her. She wasn't crying anymore, but she still didn't feel like talking. Big Mac set himself next to her. As she wondered to herself if she wanted him there or not, he spoke.
"Pinkie Pie stopped by. Said there was a party happening in honor of Princess Luna's return. Don't rightly know who that is, but I guess that's what the party's for. I was gonna go, but I think you need me more than some dumb old party."
He nuzzled himself against her for a moment. Applejack felt fresh tears begin to form as he settled down next to her. Quietly, she spoke. "I've got something to tell you." Pinkie screamed. Almost instantly, she stopped. It was night. Sugar Cube Corner was nowhere in sight. She looked around, fear subsiding. She was in her room, her old room from long ago, when she was just a young mare. A thought occurred to her, shockingly quick. She had died. Twilight hadn't been lying. But she wasn't dead. Pinkie could feel her heartbeat, quick but steady. She could hear the insects chirping outside. Rolling out of bed, she turned on her light and took a look at herself in the mirror. She was young. Not an itty-bitty thing, but young anyway. She smiled at herself, putting a hoof to her completely pink mane. It had been a long time since she looked this good. Pinkie frowned. She had died, but was alive again. Not just alive, but was alive in a young body. What about her children? She shook her head and walked out of her room. It was all here, everything as she remembered it, and more. It had been a long time, and she now knew she didn't have foals anymore. It was hard, but Pinkie managed to fight back her tears. She loved her little foals so much. But if she really had somehow gone back in time, there was more important things to do than cry for herself. She could cry later, and she would, but now she had friends to help, and a big, mean, terrible pony to stop. She bolted out of her house before remembering that it was the middle of the night, and didn't know what day it was, or what year. It could be too late to help every pony, or too early. With a sigh, she walked back inside. She could get more answers in the morning. In the meantime, maybe she'd help herself to some crying after all. She was falling. She would have just let herself fall if she didn't notice that it was bright and sunny all of a sudden. There was no rushing wind around her, no sound of thunder roiling, and the horrible, sickening spinning had stopped. She wasn't out of control anymore. Rainbow Dash flapped her wings hard, still panicked, trying to get back into control. Pure instinct put her right again, and she found herself flying, fully in control of herself. She wasn't going to die.
"Hey, Rainbow Dash!"
a voice called. Rainbow looked down to see Pinkie was running along with her. Confused and unsure of what else to do, Rainbow landed.
What's up, Pinkie?"
Rainbow Dash tried to act natural. Whatever had happened, it sure was confusing. But she wasn't dead, so it was okay.
"Oh, it's so good to see you again, Rainbow."
Pinkie Pie flung herself forward. Rainbow Dash nuzzled back, confused but happy. When Pinkie pulled away, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling brightly.
"It's been a really, really long time since I've seen you. How are you? Is everything okay?" "Oh, silly me. Of course it is. Nothing's happened to you yet."
"What are you talking about, Pinks? We just saw each other the other day.
And what do you mean nothing's happened to me yet?
Is somebody planning a prank on me?"
"Oh, Rainbow Dash, you don't remember? I was hoping you would." "Remember what? The last thing I remember was—"
She stopped. The last thing she remembered was spinning uncontrollably, falling to her death in a terrible storm, hoping her friend Twilight was all right. But now she was perfectly fine, standing in front of Pinkie, having a totally normal for Pinkie conversation. Suddenly, she had a thought.
"What am I supposed to remember?"
Pinkie's ears flattened for a moment as she said,
"Never mind, Rainbow Dash. I just thought... Well, never mind. It was good to see you again, but I've got to check up on Applejack now."
Rainbow Dash watched in confusion as Pinkie Pie turned around and bounced her way toward Sweet Apple Acres. Shrugging, Rainbow Dash took to the skies again. She was tired and wanted to find a nice soft cloud and just take a nap. Whatever had happened was over now. She was alive, and everything was okay. As she settled herself high in the sky and closed her eyes, Rainbow Dash had the strangest feeling that everything wasn't okay. It felt like she was forgetting something extremely important, something just at the edge of memory. She yawned. Whatever it was, maybe it would come back to her after a nap. She really was very tired. Chapter 2. I mean it, sis. You go and rest up. I can handle everything around here for a while. Well, she wasn't a little girl anymore. Looked at a certain way, she was almost twice his age.
"Now you listen here, big brother."
She locked eyes with him.
"I don't need you to be coddling me just because you think I'm crazy. I ain't crazy. What I need you to do is just let me get back to my life. Now, there's work to be done on this here farm, and I aim to do my share."
Big Mac sighed. First, I didn't say I thought you were crazy. Second, he looked at the cart that was strapped to her. Applebuck season ain't for another couple weeks.
Huh?
Applejack looked around. The apples sure did look ready to be bucked, but then again...
How was I supposed to know that? I forgot. It's been a long time. You don't understand.
She could hear desperation in her voice. Tears threatened to form again if she didn't calm down. Swallowing hard, she tried to force herself to stay calm. I didn't mean nothing by it, AJ. I just think you need a little time to sort things out.
Because I'm crazy.
Applejack let her ears fall. I don't think you're crazy. I'm not sure I believe what happened is what you said happened, but I don't think you're crazy. Applejack glared before unstrapping the apple cart from her body. She let it fall to the side.
Well, that's the same thing, isn't it?
Nope.
Big Mac moved to pick the apple cart back up and set it properly to the side.
If I thought you were crazy, I'd send you to a doctor. But as it is, I just think you should take some time for yourself. If what you said happened to you did happen to you, you need all the time you can get. And if you're just stressed and had a bad, vivid dream or something, you still need some time. Either way, I can handle the farm by myself for a while.
Applejack couldn't do anything but nod. Maybe when she was actually a younger mare, she would have argued some more. But Big Mac was right. She didn't even have a good grasp on what was happening on the farm anymore. She needed to, if nothing else, catch up, for lack of a better phrase. Silently, Applejack walked away. She didn't really want to, but maybe it would be for the best to find a quiet spot in Ponyville and just sit by herself. She took her time, though, avoiding the path in an effort to waste more time and be alone, even if it wasn't what was best for her. She could downright feel herself falling further into depression as she walked slowly into town by herself. As soon as Applejack got into town, she immediately regretted her decision to go. As if by magic, there was Pinkie Pie, bouncing along straight toward her. Applejack was just too low now to fight it anymore, though, and continued in the same direction she had been going.
Applejack!
Applejack simply looked past her.
Applejack, I've been looking everywhere for you.
Pinkie took in a huge breath before continuing, and Applejack braced herself for a bout of long, inane rambling.
First I went to Sweet Apple Acres, but all I found was Big Macintosh, and he told me you had left, and he wasn't sure where you were, so I checked your room and your barn and to the place where you foaled, but you weren't there either, and...
Applejack's world shattered. What did you just say, Pinkie Pie? The look on her face must have been exactly what Pinkie Pie wanted, because she became even more excited.
Oh, Apple Rush, I'm so happy! I so hoped you'd remember. I was really disappointed when Rainbow Dash didn't remember anything, so I set off to look for you. First I went to Sweet Apple Acres, but all I found was...
Pinkie Pie, what are you talking about? How do you know? Did Big Macintosh tell you? Pinkie Pie thought for a moment.
Big Macintosh? No, silly, he just told me he didn't know where you went. Then how did you...
Shh! Apple Rush, I've got a lot to tell you.
She suddenly looked very serious.
It's very important. Follow me.
Applejack was in a total state of surprise, and nodded dumbly as she followed Pinkie all the way back to her house and into her room. Pinkie closed the door behind them, locked it, and then went over to the window and shut the blinds. Pinkie sat herself across from Applejack and motioned for her to sit down too. Applejack did so, intensely curious as to what Pinkie Pie had to say. She certainly seemed to know about Applejack's situation. Applejack hoped that, somehow, Pinkie Pie knew what was going on. Rainbow Dash walked down the road, frustration etched on her face. She didn't know what was wrong, but something was really bugging her. After waking up from her nap, rather than feeling relaxed and cheerful like normal, she just felt tense. She tried to go on with the day, but as time passed, she just couldn't shake the feeling that she was wasting her time doing things like practicing flying or moving the clouds away. Which was another thing. She could have sworn when she woke up that morning that it was supposed to be a clear sky. It was planned. That was one of the major reasons the terrible weather and all those tornadoes, she remembered, were such a drag, not to mention the lives. But now that there were no tornadoes, not in the Everfree Fields or in Ponyville, Rainbow Dash assumed she could go about her job to clear the sky without a problem. But the rest of the Pegasus ponies kept stopping her and giving her strange looks, and then tried to convince her that today was supposed to be partly cloudy. After they had undone all her work, she relented, but not before shouting at the other Pegasus ponies for being completely crazy. Now, she just didn't know what to do. Finally, she found a nice tree where no pony was around, and went up to lie down among its branches, where no one could see her. It was just so frustrating. How could she even think of anything to do? Practicing her sweet moves seemed out of the question. They just made her feel antsy. They never made her feel antsy before, and apparently there was no more weather jobs to do either. Maybe some time with her friends would make her feel better. Rainbow Dash looked down at her hooves. It was then that she realized she wasn't wearing her magic horseshoes anymore. Where had they gone? Rainbow Dash mentally shrugged. She could always get Twilight to make her a new pair. It was then she had an idea. Leaving the tree, Rainbow Dash made her way toward Twilight Sparkle's place. Maybe she could spend the day with Twilight. That pony was always in need of some company. Setting herself down at the front door of the library, Rainbow Dash knocked. She waited. No pony opened the door, and she didn't hear anything from the other side. She knocked again. Again, no response and no noise. Gritting her teeth, she kicked the door hard and winced when a sharp pain went through her leg. Stubbing her hoof just made her angrier. Teeth clenched, Rainbow Dash took to the sky, again with nothing to do, and a sense of having forgotten something very important. Pinkie Pie took a deep breath before saying everything important she could think of as fast as possible. She was happy that Apple Rush never interrupted her story, which started around the time of her death and continued all the way to Pinkie Pie's invitation to Twilight Sparkle's tea party, which was when the story got a little hairy. Pinkie Pie felt herself tense as she recalled events that, to her, only happened a day ago. She tried to put up a happy front as she went through Twilight's story about taking the elements, about killing Rainbow Dash and being the cause for Apple Rush's death, and her plans to kill the rest of them for their elements. By the end, Pinkie could feel tears rolling down her cheeks, though she couldn't remember where they came from. Apple Rush wasn't taking it any better. Pinkie sniffled and wiped the tears away from her own face before moving over and nuzzling against Apple Rush. Pinkie continued even though Apple Rush stood still. It was like trying to comfort a statue. But Pinkie understood. It was a horrible thing that had happened, and Apple Rush needed as much comfort as Pinkie could bring herself to give.
You mean that Twilight? She told you she killed me? She said she did? And that she killed my foal?
Streams of tears began to fall from Apple Rush's eyes, and Pinkie gave one last comforting squeeze before sitting back and nodding solemnly.
I'm sorry, Apple Rush, but that's what she said, and I'm certain she was telling the truth. Sugar Cube Corner exploded, and I died.
Stop calling me that.
But that was your name.
Pinkie tilted her head in confusion.
That was my name. I'm not married now. Me and Peanut ain't even met yet. Till death do us part, remember? Well, I'm dead, so I'm just Applejack again.
Pinkie was surprised to find herself at a loss for words. There was no way to make this situation any more cheerful. Minutes ticked by in silence, as Applejack and Pinkie Pie sat together. Finally, Applejack lifted her head, a sudden determined look in her eye.
You know, Pinkie, I told Big Macintosh about what happened to me.
Suddenly she stood up.
I say we head over there together, you confirm my story, and we tell him about Twilight. And we three go over to Twilight's place, break down her door, and kick that mare's head in.
Applejack didn't wait for Pinkie to reply, as she unlocked the door and ran out. Pinkie ran after her, yelling for her to wait. Applejack didn't listen. As they exited the house, Pinkie noticed it was dark out. She wasn't as fast as Applejack, not even when she was actually running. She hoped she could keep up and stop Applejack from doing anything too hasty. Twilight opened her eyes. Her head darted around, looking for any sign of Fluttershy or Spike. But she wasn't in her old castle anymore. She was back in her small, cramped library in Ponyville. She recognized it immediately. She looked down in front of her, and there sat something she hadn't seen in decades, because she hadn't needed to see it. They were notes she had worked out to herself, notes and plans on how best to do something which had already been finished and done for a long, long time now. A couple of seconds and Twilight understood. It was unexpected, but when such powerful magic was involved, sometimes unexpected things happened. She had died, and here she was again, back in Ponyville, decades younger. She smiled to herself, reading her notes again for nostalgia's sake. She would get another chance. She wouldn't mess it up this time. This time, Fluttershy would be dealt with first, and as soon as possible. Twilight ignored the niggling feelings in the back of her mind that told her something was wrong as she thought about another problem. Spike. He was probably sleeping in his bed right now. She could kill him right this moment and get rid of the body. There were dozens of spells she could use for it, and no pony would know what had happened. That would take care of a major source of her downfall. But no, it might get ponies suspicious if he suddenly went missing. Mere suspicion is what started Spike on his path to help defeat her, after all. Twilight magically levitated a nearby quill and inked it. Grabbing a piece of paper, she paused for a moment. She could request another meeting and see Celestia again as soon as possible. She could then explain everything. Maybe she could get some help. Twilight thought about that for all of 2 seconds before shaking her head. No, this was a situation she should keep to herself, at least for now. But there was still something that needed righting. Spike had to go, and she could ask Princess Celestia to make it happen. She could assign Spike to some pony else. "I don't know what the princess is thinking, Spike, but she's adamant," she imagined herself saying. "She says I no longer need your services, and you could be more useful elsewhere. This could be a good thing for you, and we can still keep in touch." Of course, they wouldn't. That would solve the Spike problem neatly. Now, if only she could solve the Fluttershy problem just as neatly.
I can't believe I'm hearing this.
Applejack had rarely ever heard him raise his voice.
My own baby sister talking about killing some pony.
Applejack stomped her foot down.
"Haven't you been listening? I ain't crazy. This is really happening, and we need your help."
Big Mac shook his head.
No way, no how. I'm not going to help you murder some poor little mare just because you two had some bad dreams.
Applejack could feel herself begin to tear up.
"Don't you trust me, big brother? I ain't lying to you.
I know you're not lying."
Applejack felt her heart break again. She had never, ever heard Big Mac take that tone of voice. Not ever. She stared at him for a moment, Pinkie Pie standing to her side, looking at both of them in turn, eyes also wet. Big Mac sighed.
I believe you, but this is an awful big thing you want me to help you with. Killing someone. I don't think I can do it. Why can't we just tell the police or something?
Applejack went over and nuzzled against her brother. She had felt awful ever since she had gone back, and she was feeling worse by the second. No pony would believe us. Her head still nuzzled against her brother's chin. This has to be taken care of ourselves before anyone gets hurt.
"We could wait a while. We still have about a year before Rainbow Dash is supposed to be killed. Maybe we can think of something. Or maybe we can wait for an opportunity to get Twilight arrested for something else."
Applejack stood up straight.
"We just need Twilight gone. Maybe we could frame her for something. We can wait quietly until the opportunity strikes. Just like she did with us."
Pinkie Pie jumped in excitement.
"Oh, that'll be fun. It'll be like we're in a comic book."
Applejack looked her brother in the eyes. "Is that okay? Could you help us with that?" There was a pause before Big Mac said,
"That sounds okay to me."
Applejack tried to smile convincingly. After the discussion, Applejack and Big Mac walked Pinkie back to her house. Together, she and Big Mac then returned to the farm, then to their rooms, and then Applejack lay down in her bed. Now that she was alone, she allowed the hatred and anger to appear on her face. A simple frame job wasn't enough. Applejack wanted Twilight Sparkle dead. That was the only way to be sure it wouldn't happen again. And that was the only way Twilight would get what she deserved. As she fell asleep, Applejack smiled at all the possible accidents that Twilight could have while in prison. Pinkie Pie woke up the next morning, head bursting with so many things that needed to be done that she didn't know where to begin. The previous night, they had settled on a basic strategy, get Twilight out of the picture through some kind of frame-up. But then she went home and there was still so much to think about. Being from the future, she and Applejack had a good idea of what was going to happen as time went on. They should already be planning, coming up with ideas, anything to keep Rainbow Dash from dying. With that in mind, Pinkie Pie quickly made her way to Sugar Cube Corner, where she told the Cakes she was too sick to work that day. She didn't like lying, but it had to be done. She tried to be as realistic as possible as she threw herself on the floor pretending to be ill, but it was hard to not have fun with it. In the end, though, she got out of work that day, reminding the Cakes that there was nothing worse than a sick pony in a bake shop. With her job out of the way, at least for the meantime, Pinkie Pie hopped herself over to Sweet Apple Acres. Once there, it wasn't too hard to find both Big Macintosh and Applejack, who were out doing who knows what with the apple trees. As soon as she approached, Big Mac sighed.
AJ, I thought we were just gonna sit tight for a while.
Applejack glanced back and forth between Pinkie Pie and her brother. I didn't call Pinkie here. Pinkie Pie took a deep breath.
I'm sorry, I just thought we needed to talk more because there's still so much we need to talk about. Like when would be a good time to get Twilight, because we can talk about that because we know the future and we also should really talk about...
Suddenly she gasped because something really important just occurred to her.
What about Fluttershy and Rarity?
Applejack gave her a confused look before her eyes widened in understanding. You think they could be here too? Pinkie Pie nodded.
But what about Rainbow Dash? You said she didn't remember nothing. And, maybe they made it out okay? We should still check, and the sooner the better.
Pinkie Pie tried to put on her most convincing face.
Just one more day of this, then we can lay low. Just one itty-bitty day.
She looked to both Applejack and Big Mac in turn. Applejack looked really conflicted. Big Mac rolled his eyes, but then sobered as he caught sight of his sister's face. Finally, Applejack said, Okay, one more day, but that's it. As much as I'd love to, my brother's right when he says we can't put our lives completely on hold for this. Pinkie Pie jumped in the air with excitement.
Great, we can split up. Who do you want to check up on, Fluttershy or Rarity?
It was morning, and Rainbow Dash felt like attacking someone. Anyone, it didn't matter. The morning started off frustratingly confusing. Looking at what weather was scheduled for the day, she couldn't help but notice the date was wrong. The calendar was almost 2 years old, and the day and month were completely wrong too. Thinking it was just some sort of lame prank, Rainbow Dash pointed it out. But, just like the day before, she just got a bunch of strange looks, and ponies telling her no, she was wrong, and was she feeling all right, and she'd been acting strange lately. The worst thing was that some part of her couldn't help but think they were right. Something was wrong. She had been feeling it ever since her miraculous survival, and she couldn't figure out what it was. The other ponies had just picked up on it, and Rainbow Dash was just being resentful. She knew she shouldn't feel so frustrated, but she couldn't help it. So she took the day off. She didn't want to, but deep down she knew it was for the best. The other ponies all looked relieved, which only served to annoy her more. So, here she was, flying aimlessly, the morning sun glowing in the sky being obstructed by clouds she wasn't helping to move. She groaned in annoyance. She really needed to get over whatever was bugging her. Looking down, she saw a familiar form walking slowly along. Remembering that she had nothing to do and her attempts to be by herself the previous day hadn't gone well, she landed.
Hey, Spike,
she said, trying her best to sound normal.
You're up early.
Spike looked up, and Rainbow Dash noticed he was frowning deeply. Hey, Rainbow Dash. I'm sorry, but I'm kind of not in the mood for it right now. Rainbow Dash finally had somebody she knew here to be with. She wasn't about to let him go that easily. That makes 2 of us, she said, following along as Spike began to walk forward.
But I really need some company right now. And if you're sad, maybe you could use some too.
Spike sighed as he lowered his head. I guess. They walked in silence for a while before she asked.
What's got you so down?
Spike didn't look back up as he said, Princess Celestia's transferring me. I'm not going to be Twilight's assistant anymore. I'm leaving Ponyville.
What?
She felt her wings open involuntarily.
Why would the princess go and do a thing like that?
She says Twilight doesn't need me anymore, and that there are other ponies who do. So I'm being sent back to Canterlot to help some other pony I've never met before. A chariot's coming tomorrow to take me back. Twilight said we'd keep in touch, but
I don't know. Something about the way she said it makes me think she doesn't mean it. I thought we were good friends, you know? But I don't know. I think I was wrong. If you want, Spike, I'll keep in touch with you, said Rainbow Dash unthinkingly. I've never had a pen friend before. Spike raised his head. Really? He said, sounding a bit confused. But we barely know each other. Rainbow Dash thought about it. She and Spike had never really hung out, but she didn't think they were that distant. And if Spike felt that they were, and he was leaving, then she should definitely keep in touch. Maybe you're right, Spike. But that's all the more reason for us to stay in contact. Aw, gee, Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash felt herself smile a bit at the light blush that formed on the dragon's cheeks. Okay then, I'll make sure to write to you after I leave. Suddenly, Rainbow Dash had an idea. I'd hate to leave you just now, Spike, but I gotta do something. But don't worry, I'll see you again before tomorrow. And with that, she took to the sky, flying toward Sugar Cube Corner, feelings of frustration and anger only barely bothering her. Being with a friend seemed to be helping, and an opportunity to be with even more friends had presented itself. Rainbow Dash dropped down in front of Sugar Cube Corner. She went through the open door. Hi there, Mr. and Mrs. Cake. Pinkie Pie around? Mrs. Cake dropped the whisk she was holding. Pinkie Pie took the day off today. She said she hasn't been feeling well, and there's nothing worse than a sick pony in a bake shop. She rolled her eyes. Rainbow Dash thought about it for a moment. As far as she knew, Pinkie Pie had never asked for a day off work. But hey, there was a first time for everything. As Rainbow Dash turned around, something caught her eye. A calendar was hanging on the wall by the front door. She could feel her chest knot as she saw the date and year. There was no way the Cakes would be pulling the same prank on her. And unless Pinkie Pie was getting way more into things than she normally did, the calendar couldn't be blamed on her either. Mrs. Cake. Rainbow Dash glanced back. Is that calendar right? She pointed a hoof at the offending item. Mrs. Cake dropped the whisk again and squinted in the direction of the calendar. Yes, that's right. Why? Is today an important day for you? Rainbow Dash couldn't understand what was going on, but now she knew there really was something to worry about. No, nothing important. Spike still hadn't come back yet. Twilight Sparkle was annoyed. The longer he stayed out, the more she was going to have to work to console him, and the more annoying it was going to be to make him believe that she did care for him, and that everything was going to be okay. She scoffed to herself at that idea. It had been so long since she had to pretend to be inviting and friendly to others. She really didn't want to have to start doing it again. But alas, this was the hoof she was dealt. What was going to be even worse was establishing a speedy method of communication between herself and Princess Celestia, now that Spike would be gone. Truth be told, she was certain she could do it, but it'd take some time, and then she might have to explain to Celestia how she suddenly was so very advanced in magic. Twilight shook her head. It was a problem, but not insurmountable. In the meantime, Twilight put her thoughts back to work on solving the Fluttershy problem. She knew Fluttershy had to be the first this time around, but how best to do it without any pony knowing something was up? Suddenly, it clicked. Twilight was astonished at how fast the answer came to her. Quickly, she began writing down a short list of things she'd need, writing magically so no pony else would be able to see it. Finishing that up, she began to look around for a certain book, before remembering she probably didn't have it yet. Suddenly, her eyes found her old reference guide to the Elements of Harmony, a book she hadn't opened in a very long time. Why would she? She had memorized everything in it a long time ago, and there were better guides out there. She sighed. Better guides she didn't have anymore. It was then that she felt a very strange urge to give this old, outdated book another look. It was a silly feeling. She had read it cover to cover, and knew everything it had to say by heart. Still... She sighed and opened the book, starting at the beginning. She would just read the whole thing again. It wasn't like there was anything else to do until Spike was gone forever. Pinkie Pie bounced into Rarity's boutique without so much as a knock.
It was okay because Rarity watched her do it and hadn't said anything before Pinky entered.
I know we're friends, dear, but you could have knocked first.
Pinky moved closer. Rarity sat down in front of her table, looking at some designs full of measurements and numbers Pinky couldn't understand because she wasn't a fashion designer. The drawings looked pretty, though, and she supposed that was the point, but this wasn't the time for that.
Hey, Rarity, I wanted to ask you something.
Rarity looked up from her designs, but then looked right back down again.
Yes, what is it, Pinkie Pie?
Pinky took a deep breath and exhaled.
You don't remember dying, then coming back to relive your life, do you?
Rarity stopped what she was doing. Slowly, she raised her head and looked into Pinky's eyes. Finally, she began to laugh. It wasn't a huge laugh, but it was a laugh of genuine amusement.
Oh, my dear, that's quite a funny question. You sure do say the strangest things sometimes.
She smiled awkwardly.
I mean no disrespect, of course.
She put her arm on Pinky's shoulder. Pinky stepped back, ready to leave.
Well, that's all I wanted to know, Rarity. I'll see you later.
Pinkie Pie bounced back out of the boutique, thinking about how easy that turned out to be. As she trotted along to Waffle Honey's breakfast house, a familiar form dropped down from the sky and landed a few feet in front of her.
I've been looking everywhere for you, Pinks. Listen, I got to talk to you.
Pinky's curiosity was piqued, and she allowed herself to get sidetracked, but only for a moment.
Sure, what's going on, Rainbow Dash?
Rainbow Dash leaned in really close.
I need you to help throw a going-away party for Spike. It needs to be tonight.
Pinkie Pie was confused.
Why do you want to throw a going-away party for Spike? Where's he going?
Rainbow Dash took a step back. It looked like she wanted the party to be a secret, but whatever she was about to say wasn't.
Spike's been reassigned to some pony else. He's not going to be Twilight's assistant anymore. He's going to be leaving Ponyville.
Pinkie Pie was about to shout out, sure, but what Rainbow Dash said caught up to her. Spike had been reassigned? That had never happened before. When Spike had left, it was because he had become a big dragon that needed to find his own place in life, not because he was a little baby dragon getting moved to some other pony. Still, if he was leaving, he needed a party. Pinkie Pie would just have to bring it up with Applejack and Big Macintosh later.
Sure, Rainbow Dash, I'll help. But I gotta do some stuff first. Meet me at Sugar Cube Corner. We can't go there. The cakes think you're sick.
Rainbow Dash nudged Pinkie Pie playfully on the shoulder.
Honestly, Pinkie Pie, I didn't think you were one to skip out on work.
Pinky chuckled nervously.
Well, how about your place?
You can't fly, Pinks, and neither can Spike, and the party's for him. Why don't we just tell Twilight and—
No!
Pinkie Pie shouted before she could help it. A few ponies who were walking by stopped to look at her, but only for a moment. Soon they went back to whatever it was they were doing. Pinky chuckled again.
I mean, no.
She stamped her front hoof, wanting to show Rainbow Dash that she was serious.
Rainbow, we're friends, right?
Yeah.
And we've been friends for years, right? You can trust me, right?
Rainbow Dash nodded.
Then please, please, please trust me now. Try not to hang around Twilight. She's a really bad pony, and she doesn't want anything good for us. Please, just trust me on this.
Pinky frowned as she looked into Rainbow Dash's eyes, hoping against hope that she would believe her and be wary of Twilight.
But Pinky, Twilight's our friend.
She is not our friend. She tried to wipe her eyes. They had gotten watery somehow.
She's only pretending.
A few more seconds passed.
Please, just trust me on this.
Finally, Rainbow Dash just nodded dumbly.
Okay, Pinkie Pie, if you say so. But Spike still needs a party, and we still need a place to have it.
Pinky finished drying her eyes. She looked up, smiling.
How about Sweet Apple Acres? They have all that space. We can have it outside, under the stars and everything.
That sounds like a great idea, Pinky. Pinkie Pie smiled wide, happy the conversation had finally gotten back to something that wasn't terribly sad.
Okay, I'll meet you at your house in about an hour and a half. I still have some things I need to do.
Rainbow Dash nodded as she took to the skies. Pinkie Pie watched her fly off for a while before finally returning on her way to the breakfast house. Applejack hoofed at the ground nervously, which was a mighty strange thing to be doing in front of Fluttershy of all ponies. How are you doing there, Fluttershy? Fluttershy seemed to notice something was up and tried to hide under her own wing, before thinking better of it.
Hi, Applejack. Is something wrong?
She spoke with the same slow and shy rhythm she always had. Applejack wondered if the wording she used was an invite to plunge right in and explain things or not. Of course, she decided not to. I was wondering, Fluttershy, how you've been holding up these past few days. Fluttershy took a while before replying.
I've been fine, Applejack.
No. She paused, trying to think of a way to bring this up without really bringing it up. No bad dreams or nothing? No thoughts on the future at all? Everything's just fine and dandy on your end? She hoped that would be enough. Fluttershy just looked even more awkward than normal.
I don't know what you mean. Is there something I should know? Is something bad going to happen?
Applejack decided that was enough. Now, don't you worry, darling. Nothing's going to happen. I was just wondering about you is all. Applejack didn't want to linger any longer and ran off without saying goodbye. She thought to herself she was being a little rude, but really, hers was a difficult situation to be in. Applejack didn't stop until she made it to the breakfast house, where Pinkie Pie had agreed to meet her. It was always crowded there. Nobody would overhear them talking. Applejack sat down with a glass of apple juice and waited. And waited. And waited some more. She was on her fourth glass before Pinkie Pie finally came crashing in. Pinkie Pie sat down across from Applejack. I've found out something important. Applejack forced herself to not bring up the lateness of Pinkie's arrival before saying, Is it about Rarity? Pinkie Pie shook her head.
No, it's about Spike. He's been reassigned.
What does that mean?
It means he's leaving Ponyville. Rainbow Dash told me when I was on my way here. She wants us to throw a party for him. Also, we're having the party at Sweet Apple Acres. I hope you don't mind.
Applejack didn't really care about parties.
I don't, but why is this important?
Wait. The gears in Applejack's mind began to turn, and suddenly she realized this hadn't happened before. Spike was still with Twilight when she died, and if Pinkie was right, he wasn't supposed to leave for a long time after Applejack's death. Which made Applejack really wonder what could have caused this. She sighed, annoyed that things were getting more complicated. Really, all she wanted to do was kill Twilight and be done with it, but events just weren't rolling that way.
So, what are we going to do about it, besides throw a party? And what about the party, anyway? I don't want her anywhere near my farm unless it's to hang.
Pinkie Pie giggled.
See, I already thought of that. We'll just not invite her, and if she comes and asks us why she wasn't invited, we'll say we did invite her. The invitation just must have gotten lost in the mail.
Seems good enough to me. I'll talk to Big Mac about the party. I'm sure he won't mind either. Granny Smith for sure won't care.
Great. I gotta go tell Rainbow Dash then. I'm supposed to meet her at her house soon. After we get all the supplies we need, we'll come by with Spike as quickly as a really quick thing.
Rainbow Dash's head was a whirl of thoughts and worries for the hour she was alone waiting for Pinkie Pie. She now knew for sure her strange feelings were actually well-founded. She just didn't know exactly what was going on, but she was sure something was going on. First was the date. There was no denying it. She was in the past. Something told her, though, she wouldn't have to worry about running into another Rainbow Dash anywhere like in comics or stories. She was probably in her old body. And the why had come to her as quick and painful as the lightning. No miracle had happened. Well, not a preferable miracle. She had died out there in those tornadoes, and those tornadoes were probably still whirling around in the future. And somehow, here she was. But really, how did that happen? She just didn't know. And now, there were other things to worry about. She was really in the past, but things weren't happening like they should. Pinkie never lied to get out of work, and Spike was never reassigned. And what about Twilight? Pinkie Pie had looked deadly serious when she said Twilight was not their friend. Putting it all together, Rainbow Dash just couldn't make sense out of it all. She was still missing something, she knew it, and she would have to find out what it was. She looked around just to make extra sure she was alone in her house before nodding to herself and deciding what she was going to have to do. She'd have to go out and start keeping an eye on Pinkie and Twilight. Pinkie because she was acting oddly, and Twilight because Pinkie had said so, and it wasn't like Rainbow Dash had any other options. Really, it felt very strange to decide that you had to start spying on your own friends. Night had fallen, and Spike wasn't back yet. At this point, Twilight was beyond caring. She had just finished her impromptu read-through of her old book, and for some reason, it all sounded like utter garbage to her now. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the book. As magical facts and knowledge flew through her mind, the entire process she had been taught to sever elements just seemed so stupid, and she didn't know why. All the books agreed, the conclusions were undeniable, and yet there was a niggle. The same sort of niggle that started her to read that stupid book again. She would have to think hard about it. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe no pony with her magical knowledge and insight had come forward before to do the thing she needed to do. But of course, that was silly. Her process had worked. She had gotten more powerful with each severing, and her power had caused her to be flung back in time for another chance. But no, that wasn't right. Twilight yelled in frustration, throwing her book across the room. She was once again glad that Spike would be gone by tomorrow. Something was wrong, and she needed time to herself to work it out.